and society. Part of this session will be about the two main areas that we have at the level of global strategy. One has to do with the growth of the internet, and the other has to do with the strengthening of the internet. In order to do this, we will have Kirsten O'Heflatterty. He is the Vice President for the region of Latin America and the Caribbean in Internet Society. And without further ado, Christian has the floor. Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to be sharing my screen. Just a second. During this session, please do not be afraid to interrupt if you have any questions. Nancy, if you can let me know whether people have any questions so that I can see it, because once I go into full screen, I won't be able to see the chat. And like I was saying, the idea is for us to connect the ISOC strategy with the interest of the work of the chapters and the volunteers. And many times what happens is that chapters may be interested or have the opportunity to work on certain things that go beyond ISOC's priorities. And it's really good for us to talk about it when those opportunities arise. So what I want is to show you the strategy that we have for the next 5 years, to share the projects that we are currently working on and that we will continue working on next year. And then for all of us together, see which opportunities might arise and how we can collaborate. And in order for our organization strategy to be coherent with the projects and the mission of the organization, the first thing that we need to see is at the highest level, which is the mission of Internet Society, or what has that mission been so far. Internet Society was created to support and promote the development of the Internet as a global technical infrastructure and as a resource that helps enrich people's lives. We believe that the Internet is a tool that does society well, that is much more beneficial than the issues that it might create. So if we know that it can enrich people's lives, we want to develop it in a way that we can get the most out of it. And in order for this to happen and for us to meet this mission, we know that the internet needs to continue being open. We all need to be agents, and we all need to have an influence on the development of the internet. The internet also needs to be globally connected so that any person connected at any point in the network has the same experience. If not, this would not be a global network. And it is important for us that this characteristic of the internet is maintained so that every single person can have the same experience regardless of where they are in the world, or at least that's what we aspire to. The internet also needs to be a secure, trustworthy space, a space where we can carry out activities feeling secure. And we need to be able to maintain and safeguard all of these aspects. And of course, this isn't simple, and every single one of these concepts are currently under threat. So our objective as an organization is to preserve this internet way of networking and working for the greater good of the communities. Now, if we know what we want as an organization, and if we have a clear objective in mind, we need to think about how to do this. And for that, it is fundamental that we work with all the stakeholders who implement the internet everywhere they are. And those are the communities that make the internet work, both at the local level because they're close to infrastructure, and at the design level, if we're talking about structures and protocols and so on and so forth. Also, if we want to build and develop applications, technologies, and infrastructure, and open standards, of course, we need to do this in an open way. Protocols and services that we use on the internet are agreed upon by technical communities. They discuss which are the necessary services for the internet, and together they agree what is the best way to implement those protocols. An internet, which implies the interconnection of networks, is made up of a wide array of operators who together decide which is the best way of exchanging traffic by interconnecting their networks. And all of these decisions are come to in an open, collaborative, transparent way. And that should be the spirit of the internet, of course. And then lastly, we also need to work on policies. So apart from working with communities and in order for all of us to work in a transparent, collaborative, open environment, governments and policies always need to align, consistently align with those policies and with that development of the internet. And that is something that we should not take for granted. That is something that we should work on. And that is where the chapters and the volunteers come in, because in each country we need to make sure that those policies, those regulations and recommendations and actions the governments are partaking in go along that spirit of collaboration that we need. So if we want to be clear as to what is the spirit that the internet should follow and what are the characteristics that we want to preserve, we should say that the internet is open, it is globally connected, it is secure, and is trustworthy. Those are the main principles that we should preserve. Like I said, open internet is clear. It's something that we've been experiencing so far. And there are many situations at a global level that sometimes put into question or threaten that in the internet. That someone had an open mic and it was difficult to hear. Please, let's mute that person. Thank you. So I was saying any person can participate in the development of a service, of a protocol, as being a part of the ITF. They can implement the necessary technologies to create an access to the internet. And a clear example of this is what we know as community networks. We will be going into detail later on into that, but they can create infrastructures without asking for permission, for example. And that's something that we should preserve. And that is one of the things that are more under threat right now, either because of government interest, because of big corporate interest. And together, as members of this internet community, either as members of organizations or as volunteers, we should try to preserve this openness. The same thing applies, I would say, to the internet being globally connected. As I was saying, one of the basic functions of the internet is that we can connect in any node of the internet, and it has access to any other nodes around the world. And that is a main characteristic of the internet. And it is necessary for the internet to have this wide scope, but it is also a threat. So many times situations arise where the way in which we solve problems is by isolating parts of the networks, either by filtering traffic to or from certain parts of the network. Sometimes what people do is shut down certain parts of the network or censor content under the excuse or the guise that there is a concern. And what happens there is that the global scope of the internet and the global reach of the internet is thus limited. And this is a real threat to the internet. And if we don't work together to identify this and to defend this, this will actually be very detrimental for the development of the internet. Now, with regards to security in the world of the internet, there are many angles, there are many vulnerabilities and threats that we know that we have in the systems that are connected to the internet. We also have deficiencies in the security systems, and we know that operator networks may be vulnerable at times, either because they are not properly implemented or they're not operating properly as well. And many situations might arise that make those services that we're using insecure. And that is done unintentionally sometimes, but sometimes it is done intentionally in order to have access to our information. So governments and hackers might actually access our information. So there is a wide array of situations that affect the security of internet services, and they have an item in this last item, which is the item of trust and whether or not internet is trustworthy. Because if we don't focus on making sure that internet is safe and secure in all of its dimensions, in its use and its applications and protocols and infrastructures, if we don't create a secure environment for the users, then it will end up being untrustworthy for users, and it won't have the positive impact that it has had so far. So it is fundamental for us to be mindful and protect security with regards to that users can have access to. So the systems that users are using to be secure, but also for us to think ahead and think about how applications and infrastructures are threatened by different agents by weakening or incorporating vulnerabilities to security in the spirit of solving other problems. And many times when we're trying to solve problems in an inappropriate way, we're creating vulnerabilities, or we're putting one of the main principles of the internet at risk, which in this case is security. And in that way, we are weakening the entire development of the internet. And these are the main goals that we need to preserve. And then we grouped the strategy and the strategic goals that we have for the next 5 years in three main areas. These are build, that has to do with us having more access to internet. Then promote, that has to do with promoting the good aspects of the internet, for example, the internet way of networking, as we've seen so far, that there are certain characteristics that made internet be the network that it is today that we want to preserve. So we need to identify those principles. And in order for us to do that, one of the projects that we have, and we will be discussing on later on this afternoon, focusing on that internet way of networking and on the principles that we have. So please join us this afternoon later on, because we will specifically focus on that. And then beyond that, we need to actively work along with regulators, governments, policymakers, so that that internet way of networking and that internet model is not affected, so that internet structure is secure. And so by preserving and safeguarding that internet way of doing things, we can make sure that interconnection and connectivity remains as it has remained so far. If we are not interested, or if we don't actively participate in those decisions that are being taken that affect the internet, what happens is that little by little, this internet model will be weakened. The trust that we have on internet will also be weakened. And then, of course, the experience that we have within the internet will also be weakened, and it will be modified. And maybe the impact won't be immediate. We won't realize that from the beginning. But the problem is that this tool that we've been taking advantage of for so long will be different, and it won't benefit us in the way that we believe It should.
Y dentro de esta
And
responsabilidad
within
de
this
promover
responsibility that we have of
el internet
promoting
con
these
este
principles, the
dispositivo,
last point has to
también
do with
tenemos que pensar
technology. Internet society has been around for 27 years now. No, I'm sorry,
¿cómo
28.
será cuando
And it
las
was
redes sociales
created when
sean
internet
el software
technologies
más
were
importante
just starting to have an important,
para
significant
nuestra relación?
impact.
Creería que
Internet
la
was being
relación
used
principalmente
commercially. We were
entre
realizing that this tool had potential for much more, and technologies were being informally developed. So
ordenar
it became necessary for us to organize, safeguard, and create a safe
estas
space
tecnologías
for these technologies, so that
igualmente
these technologies could be developed in a community, right?
existían
So this
organizaciones
group
y grupos científicos
that worked on that was the ITF, the Internet Task Force. They continued to work on that development, and that was one of the inspiring reasons why ISOC was created. And as of that moment, that group of engineers can work as an independent community. And Internet Society just simply makes
como
sure
ha pasado
that
con
those
otras herramientas
people feel
tecnológicas
comfortable in the development of technology and protocols that we use
que
every day. And we need to
existen y lo
promote
tenemos que
that
asegurar
style of designing services. We need to make sure that security is intrinsic to the definition of all those protocols too, and that all the infrastructure and all the network interconnection follow those principles.
asegurar
And we do this in many ways. And in order to do it, we need to become engaged and involved, especially in regions such as ours,
donde hay menos
where perhaps there is less engagement or less participation, and in certain areas we are falling behind when compared to others. So we need to actively identify who are those engineers or those young men and women who are interested in
y
giving
acompañar
something to the community and to work with us in development
promover
of the internet.
las redes
For example,
sociales
promoting exchange point in their local communities, or working in work groups in the ITF, or participating in groups where policies are discussed for the assignment of resources for the internet. There are many opportunities for them to collaborate, and we should leverage those opportunities, and then young people in the region should leverage those opportunities. And the way in which us we can get to do that is by promoting and sharing the importance of this open model that we want for the internet. So we want more young men and women to become involved and engaged
en estos lugares donde se toman
in those spaces or in those areas where internet decisions are being taken, where we talk about network operation,
y para hacerlo
resource allocation, internet protocols. So, again, as
obviamente
members of chapters and as volunteers, we need to show those
y
opportunities to young people.
esto tiene que ver
And then our last strategic goal has to do with the defense of the internet. The first two
construir y promover
that had to do with building and promoting
tiene que ver más con
are more
profundizar
about spreading the mission and the vision of ISOC, and with this constructive role, if you will. And defending has to do with
y
just being
actuar
very
sobre las
attentive and just act in the face of threats to the internet.
nos debería
So if
permitir
we see that governments are discussing or making decisions
tratar de
that
darle
might affect and
claras
have a negative impact on the internet, then
de
we should
cómo
try to
modificar
find opportunities so that those
nuestro
changes
sistema
are
de
in
comunicaciones
favor of the development of the network interconnection,
para
and that they are actually
preservar y estimular este sistema.
positive and beneficial for this
Es común
internet way of doing
que
things.
los modelos tradicionales
And of course, because of the traditional telecommunication models, there
impliquen
are lobbies and there are government interests, and there are these connections between public and private entities that
modelos
call
sociales
for a model that doesn't really benefit everyone in the community, or that sometimes helps maintain a certain status quo. or maybe there is an influence of a particular operator on policymakers, or that might lead to comfortable situations for governments and enterprises. And we know that the internet affects those interests at times. So we need to make sure that the changes that are made ensure that we have this open way of networking. And many times they actually are against monopolies or against stringent regulations, or cases where regulations do not want to be revised or modified, or about the way in which resources are allocated, such as the case of what happens with the telecommunications spectrum, which are done really slowly and in a very complex way, and in a way hinder the incorporation of new stakeholders in the conversation table. And another thing that is connected to this concept of defending is that a lot of the times when there's a problem, people try to find simple solutions, and this is what happens with encryption. Sometimes we have a particular crime, and an internet tool is used. You know, the police wants to access information, and in order to break the barriers, they want to weaken encryption in order to access information. And those attempts of weakening encryption actually expose us all as internet users without actually solving the problem, because those who actually commit crimes know how to bypass those access. If you know that you need to hide, you're going to do everything in your power so that no one can access the information that you're putting in the network. And by weakening encryption massively, every single person that is using the internet becomes exposed and vulnerable within the network, because someone was trying to apply a solution or come to a solution that was inadequate for that particular problem. So if we know what the problems are, we recognize the real problems that we have, that arise because of certain internet crimes. The solution will never be to weaken the internet. I am sorry, but Chris is frozen. Oh, here he's back. I'm sorry. So, the way would be to show that encryption needs to be strong and show them that weakening is encryption is not the best solution, and to try to come together to find a way to solve the problems. Yes, I'm sorry. We couldn't hear you for a while, but now you're back. Okay, and the last point that we want to focus on and we want to defend has to do with defending the internet against shutdowns. Because again, when governments and agents try to find simple solutions, they shut down the internet to avoid a problem. And this is something that we see and we keep on seeing quite often now. And it is curious because in those places where shutdowns were implemented, it wasn't useful in solving the problems that had arisen. And yet, even if that's the case, more and more attempts keep arising to shut down the internet, either to avoid popular manifestations or to avoid people cheating in a test, because now everything is being done virtually. So, what happens is that once again, problems are there. We don't solve those problems by shutting down the internet. And by shutting down the internet at a massive level, we are affecting so many processes that are hard to measure. So, again, in those places where we see that censorship, filtering, or limitation to the access to the internet is being promoted as a solution to problem. Here is where we have chapters and volunteers and members who might help us come to new solutions that are better. So now let's move on to more concrete cases. So far, we've been discussing the global strategy for the next 5 years. We've talked about how we divided the different topics that we need to work on and aspects that we need to consider into three areas. But now for our plan, we do need concrete objectives. And we call those projects. So these are concrete projects that have a deadline, that have a that have identified a problem and a possible strategy to solve it. And those projects that we've thought about, and actually they've come out with the participation of the entire community, and that because of the situation that we've been going through this year, we will probably continue working on them next year, are eight. Um, we won't necessarily work on all of them next year too, but this year we started working on eight projects and we divided them into grow projects and strong projects. So the projects that have to do with growing, and this is something connected to the aspect of building our community networks, IXPs, we call them infrastructure and community development. And it's not just internet exchange points, though. We will look at that later on into detail, but it has to do with working with all the communities that make the internet work, and we will see which communities are those. And then the third point has to do with measuring certain aspects of the internet, which are important in order for us to see how the internet is working. And then the projects that have to do with strength, and they are, of course, connected both to promoting and defending, are the routing security projects, the manners, the open standards everywhere projects, the time security project, the internet way of networking project, and the encryption project. Now we will see each of them into detail, and I especially want to see how volunteers and chapters can collaborate from their countries working on these projects. So, first we saw those three big areas that were aligned to our mission that have to do with building, promoting, and defending. Within the aspects of building and promoting, we group the projects that have to do with internet growth, and then defending has to do with advocacy and promotion as well, and they have to do with making internet stronger. The end objective, if you will, or the final goal that kind of encompasses all of this is that we're working for an internet that is global. Remember, like I said, this need for there not to be any isolation in internet points so that we can access from one point to another in any part of the world, for the internet to be open, for the internet to be secure and trustworthy. So that is our end goal. And that is what actually shapes and justifies all the projects that we have. So now let's go working and looking at one project at a time. And again, if you have questions or doubts or ideas, please do interrupt me and share them. Because what we want is to see how these projects that we're working on might resonate with the activities that you are carrying out every day in your countries, and for us to look for opportunities, especially considering that right now we are thinking about what we will do next year. We want to wrap up this year to see if we have any short term ideas, and then just to focus on planning next year and see how we can help everyone and work together. Christian, there is a question. Edgar has a question. He said, who protects the internets of users? And then I think he's from Costa Rica. He says, uh, I saw Costa Rica is the first evangelist of internet for everyone. Yes, with regards to protecting user interests, I would say that luckily we have a lot of organizations who share our objectives and our mission and who focus on different areas that I think go a bit beyond the goals of our organization. So if we go back to our mission and to our goals in particular, ISOC is an organization that really focuses on infrastructure. You know, the idea of something globally connected, open, secure, trustworthy. Those principles have to do with how internet works. And as I was telling you, when internet society was created, the springboard for that was just to provide a home for the people who were developing standards. Um, so it was very much at the infrastructure level that we were focusing on. Um, so as the mission says, we believe that internet is a technology that should enrich people's lives and do good by society. So here we find this connection between the impact that the internet has and the benefit that the internet has for society, and certain organizations that attempt to protect human rights and see the importance of the internet in the protection of human lives. Or maybe we can focus with organizations that work on disability or education or with any other rights really that are inherent to human life. And all of these organizations realize that the internet is a fundamental stakeholder in the presentation and preservation and safeguarding of those rights. So, who protects the interests of users? I would say that there are many organizations then which depend on the internet, but which do not necessarily work on the projects that we have, because our projects are more focused or have more to do with infrastructure and technical issues, which does not mean that they're not related to what the organizations are doing. And there are many infrastructures because and intersections, because there are topics that are relevant for all of us. For example, if there's an organization that is concerned with the protection of the right to privacy, we might see that that might connect to encryption. So there might be a common concern that we are all sharing that affect both organizations, but each organization considers this from a different angle. And that does not mean that from the Internet Society, we won't be working with all those organizations that are influenced by the Internet, because right now everything is influenced by Internet. And that's something that we need to focus on. So because we're a small organization, we do need to focus on something particular. So we focus on the fundamental principles of the internet that have to do with the technical aspects of the internet. And in particular, for our next year, we have these 8 projects, as I was saying. Christian, there is another question. Which strategies do you have with regards to internet restrictions existent in some of the countries of the region? Well, that's an interesting question. I won't go into detail because it does have a lot to do with the internet way of networking, um, and with some actions that governments demand of operators. And that has to do with the responsibility of intermediaries, which are operators, of course, as people who carry out the actions or the demands of the government. But once again, it is hard to generalize or to make really general comments, because when we talk about censorship, in some cases, restrictions are rather random. And that has more to do with human rights or with the limitations um, to civil liberties that are really problematic independently of whether or not they happen at the sphere of the internet or not. So that kind of goes beyond the goals of the organization. And like I said, there are human rights organizations that are better equipped to intervene in these cases. What we do need to make sure of is that the infrastructure, the protocols, the services, the principles of the internet are not affected or negatively impacted, because that might become generalized. If we focus on preserving and safeguarding these principles, those attempts that will always exist to limit us, to censor us, or to restrict us in any particular way, will always be harder to implement. Then, of course, as it happens with all technology, there is sometimes misuse, or perhaps the use of technology for the sake of crime. And that there we need to work together to find the best solutions to those problems. So, if what we are trying to do is find someone who committed a crime, or if there is a particular risk to society, there are certain tools at the hand of operators or anyone who provides access services or of data centers, who might actually follow and monitor those people that are suspected criminals. But those are very specific points. They're not massive cases, right? So when we talk about human rights, when we talk about censorship and limitations that sometimes happen because governments implement them, what we have to do is to make sure that the infrastructure does not allow for or make it easy to implement these massive restrictions and censorships against citizens. And then, on the other hand, when there is a misuse of the internet services, together we need to collaborate to identify and avoid those misuses. But again, like I said, it is a matter of, if internet is less secure for everyone, we're not really solving internet crimes. More questions, Nancy?
Y hay una pregunta más.
Yes, there is
¿Hay
another one.
una
Is
posición
there
técnica de
any
Internet
technical
América
position
relacionada
by
a
by
la
internet
política
society related to political
de seguridad de
issues
infraestructura de algunas
with
tecnologías
regards
5G?
to infrastructure security in 5G technologies? I don't know. I'm guessing that this might have to do with specific concerns with 5G technologies or 5G services, or protocols that are being promoted for 5G. I'm not sure what the concern that you have might be, but 5G technology is another access technology, just like many other technologies, and it will coexist with them. Um, and I think it's very likely that it won't have the radical impact that many people announce or foretell. I think we will be using 5G technologies in the same way we use 4G and in the same way we used 3G. And I personally think that that leap from the technological point of view, it is much more important for the internet that this leap from 4G to 5G. I think 5G has to do with really great technologies in the use of the spectrum and efficiency, with making the most out of the radios at that radius at the last stage. But it really doesn't imply such a significant change at the service level, or at least with additional services for Internet of Things, or I would say that none of that will really change our user experience. So, if the participant really wants to perhaps explain a bit more what it is that he was thinking about, or what he was concerned about, I might answer. But I don't really see how this technology might change things for us, at least as users and in the way that we use the internet. And I don't think that this technology will have a strong impact on any of these aspects that we were discussing as strategic goals. And they will definitely not have an impact on the mission and the vision of our organization. Um, I think there is nothing intrinsically bound in the 5G technology that affects these goals or have an impact on these goals. It does not make the use of the internet less open because internet is above access technology. It will not affect global connectivity because the only thing that 5G does is give us access to a network that an operator is providing us. So it depends on our operators how we access the internet. It doesn't intrinsically imply a security issue because we are working on security at an infrastructure level beyond that operator. Of course, if the operator has issues, but we make sure that all the upper layers are secure, there will be no problem with the operator accessing our data because there will be secure security in place to protect it. Which is why, of course, we need to make sure that we have security protocols everywhere. Operation system technologies, applications, and all layers of internet need to be security oriented, which means that if we have access technologies below that, they will be transparent. The service will never be insecure because security is intrinsically bound to our services. Someone asks, how does internet society work with governments to ensure equality of access to internet throughout the country? That's great. I like that question. And I'd rather work on questions than on the presentation because we will talk about the projects throughout the week. So carry on with the questions then. So then, back to your question. Internet Society is a global organization. Some of the employees are part of the region, but there are very few of us. We have Nancy, Israel, Guillermo, Diego, Maria, myself. I don't think that that's it. And we can't work with every government on every single aspect of the internet. So the way that we've found to really collaborate with governments um, is through chapters or through local volunteers. This is one of my last slides actually, but it helps with the answer. So basically, we work in communities because we exist for those communities. Internet is actually built by many communities, by the community of engineers, by internet service providers, by the traffic exchange points providers, and so on and so forth. And all those communities are working locally. They work in the place where infrastructure or networks are being created. The way in which we cooperate with those people and with governments and legislators and regulators is by being in that place where internet is being developed. And we do that either through partners or through chapters and volunteers. So, as an organization and as members of Internet Society and employees of Internet Society, we try to create the conditions so that those local stakeholders have the tools necessary to identify certain issues where we need to act and react, and then collaborate with them or maybe appear ourselves and help them through the processes of finding solutions. So, if we think about partners, for example, we have global partners such as the ITF or UIT or the United Nations. We have global global organizations, but then we also have local organizations too. We work with CITEL from the US, from Comitel in in Central America. And we're talking about forums of regulators that are discussing these issues, and they try to align and collaborate with us in order to make more informed decisions. And then at the local level, our volunteers and our partners and members of our chapters also have global networks too. Many times they also are members of their governments and they use the organization as a tool to make those decisions. So those regulators, many times who have to discuss certain issues, are several times members of ISALCO are working with us and have been working with us for a while. So if you have the chance to have an influence in government, or if you can get close to them and talk to them, please know that ISAC will always provide you with the right tools to help you, because the spirit of our organization is collaboration. We don't denounce. We don't point fingers at people. We don't write reports exposing issues or things that we are against or we don't like. The spirit of our organization is a spirit of collaboration, and we understand that when certain measures are taken, even if they affect the internet, they're taken because people think they're solutions. So, what we want is to talk to governments and say, okay, what is the problem that you think you have? Um, okay, maybe this is not the right solution, and maybe it doesn't solve the problem. And a lot of the times we do that through our local volunteers. So, every single one of you could actually be a stakeholder helping in the collaboration with governments. Chris, we have another question. Someone says, how can we make sure that internet reaches everyone, especially in marginal areas? In Venezuela, most families don't have access to internet and children don't have access to education. Well, that's great. And that actually connects to the first project, which is the project of community networks. The internet at first grew with an academic voluntary model. First, we were talking about the interconnection of academic networks. Then, when the organization was created in 92, we started seeing more commercially focused opportunities. That was in the 90s. And after the 90s, the commercial model was the one that pretty much covered the entirety of the world of the internet, but it actually hadn't really done that in a very equitable way, because half of the population of the world, or give or take, does not have internet connection, and in those countries where infrastructure is lacking, that is clear. So if we have areas that are far removed from city, or where investment is not put into those places because those areas don't have enough income, or because the people in those areas don't have income to pay for those services, people lose access to internet, they lose opportunities, and the inequality gap widens. And I think that that's something that we really noticed during the pandemic. Those countries and those areas where people were properly connected, it made it possible for people to continue working and studying. But in those spaces that were more vulnerable, where people who were poorer were far removed from internet structures and had connectivity issues or lack of connectivity, people who really needed help, by the way, were unable to continue with their educations, to continue working, and the gap becomes wider and wider, and it becomes harder and harder to include them in society, so they become even more marginal. And with that in mind, the Community Networks Project tries to, in a way, revert that model of commercial access, that implies having neighbors and then people of a local community, those users who are connected, to work on building the infrastructure to get internet. And thankfully, because the costs are lower and infrastructures are easier, it is possible for very few people to set up their own network so that that network can get all the way to the connection with a provider. And that's what we call community networks. And I think this is very much connected to similar networks. Um, we could have volunteer networks or entrepreneur networks who, in their communities and in their towns, might want to start setting up their networks before we would wait for the provider to come to us. But now with these community networks projects, we're providing these people their tools to build their own networks. And the project was actually focused on four areas. One has to do with deployment, of course, that is, what is the infrastructure necessary? So they set up projects. We provide funding for them so that they can build those networks. We provide, of course, capacity building. If you actually go into ISOC in our website, you can find the trainings to build community networks. Then we also need to, of course, collaborate with governments in order to change permit systems and regulations, because everything is organized for and thought for commercial providers. So a lot of the times people need to travel all the way to the capital city of their countries to get those permits, and that's hard. If they want to use spectrums, they need to make million-dollar investments, and we're talking about a small town where no one is actually making use of that spectrum. No one is occupying it. It's free. And with very little investment, they could set up their own 4G network. But in order for that to happen, they need for that spectrum to be allocated for them. And sometimes regulations don't allow for that. So we need to start kind of bringing down those walls and making sure that regulations enable those communities to actually create their own networks. But like I said, we will have a specific session on community networks that will actually be carried out by the leader in Uruguay. So it will be in Spanish too. Nancy, more questions? Yes, there's a question about 5G. I don't know if we're going to answer it or not. Yeah, yeah, I'll answer it.
Ay, se me perdió.
Wait a second, I think I lost it.
Y ahora tiene que
Someone
volver.
wrote it in the chat, but wait.
Sí,
Okay, if you want, I'll move on with the projects then, and then take the questions in the end. Okay, the next project has to do with internet exchange points and with all the communities that operate the internet. It can be academic research networks. Like I told you at the beginning, internet was created at first by a group of universities that wanted to be connected. And that exists in our region. We have a research and education networks that is actually an engine that fosters innovation, and that's actually very important for us. And we want to collaborate with those groups, of course. But the main focus of this project is just to improve interconnection and internet exchange points. And for that, chapters have been very active because in general internet exchange points are promoted and created by volunteers, and in many cases in our region those volunteers are members of the chapters, and in many cases they ask for ISOC funding to create these internet exchange points, as was the case for Dominican Republic, Bolivia. I think in every single mostly in every single country there was a similar project to this one. The same happened with network operator groups. And again, many ISOC chapters have created network operator groups, as is the case for Panama. Um, and I would say that in most countries in the region, we have these groups that discuss operation issues. And this project tries to identify those groups and those opportunities to collaborate either with the building of infrastructure, whether it is that the internet exchange point requires equipment, to help with capacity building so that people know how to improve interconnections, improve their autonomous systems, get resources from the internet, and so on and so forth, so that we can have more interconnections. Then we work on community building. So what we want is to create forums, peering forums actually, and they are about having people get together, they build on trust, and by having them connect to each other, either operators to operators, universities to operators, what we enable is for internet to escalate more. So if we have one operator taking care of everything, then it's difficult to escalate the internet. But if we have small networks who are working together, growth becomes more simple and more efficient, and of course, less costly. And then lastly, the project also works on policy and advocacy. And this is what we do along with governments and regulators, because we're trying to eliminate obstacles that might be affecting interconnectivity. Many times, telecommunication regulations are actually created or designed for mobile phone systems, and the environment for the interconnection of networks is not really created because we have monopolies that actually promote having big operators. I'm sorry, I'm going too fast, but we need to get finished on time. And then the project of measuring the internet seeks to identify all those aspects that we find in the internet, collect the data, and then present that data in an organized way. And the project in particular focuses on two main areas. And we will start measuring and providing metrics for those things. One has to do with shutdowns and about mapping the impact of those shutdowns. And then we will be providing metrics on the internet way of networking that I had already mentioned before, which we will discuss later on today. That is connected to those internet principles um, that we're trying to see how they're being affected. Then we have the Manners project, which has to do with routing security. It provides better practices so that internet incidents do not affect security, because we are using a protocol right now for the interconnection of networks, which is very simple, and it requires for a very organized operation. We need to follow best practices for filters, for configurations. And what the project tries to do is to create this agreement or this commitment on the implementation of these best practices. If we get all internet networks to align to these best practices, routing incidents will be lower. Then the open standards everywhere has to do with leading by example, showing how to provide open standards services. Time service security is connected to a protocol that we use in the internet to synchronize time. Uh, your computers and services use the NTP protocol to see what time it is and to have the right time. And that is really important for banking transactions and for many other services that we use in the internet. But it's not fully sure and secure. So this year we had an RFC by the ITF that is focusing on time service security and attempts to promote better security. About encryption, I think I've already said quite a lot of things already about the problems that we find when encryption is weakened. And this project in particular seeks to expose and avoid those attacks against encryption, or those concerns that we have that arise from weakening encryption. and internet trustworthiness in general. And then lastly, this is something that I've already discussed in your questions. So if you want, Nancy, there, we have a minute left.
Queremos
So
hablar de redes comunitarias.
yes, there's a question about community networks.
Sobre todo
The
cómo puede ser el
question
rol
is
de las
about the how the
comunidades
community
latinoamericanas
networks
para plantearnos ciertos
follow a
postulados o
standard
necesidades que nos plantean.
or not. Does ISOC provide standards? No, we don't talk about best practices or standards for the creation of community networks. We don't talk about copy paste solutions that were successful. The only thing that community networks have in common is that infrastructure is built by a community. There's a community with a need to connect, and they are the ones who implement the network. How to get that network? Well, there are many models for that. There are many success cases. Some cases they imply collaborating with an organization that comes in and helps the people in that place to create the network. Sometimes they get help and assistance from the government. Other cases, there is a university nearby, so the professionals there help them with links and traffic so that they can connect. There is no one solution that we can implement that we would recommend. There is no best practice here. I would say that the solution needs to be found by the members of that small community. And what the volunteers and members of the chapters can do is to help them and provide them the tools necessary to make decisions that are suitable for them. So, should we use radio technology? Should it be Wi Fi, 4G? Should we use optical fiber? So, in those decisions, then we would come in, or other organizations might come in to provide sage advice or tell them who they might work with. We might think about which community networks had or encountered similar issues and how they solved them, but we don't provide recommendations or
Y
standards.
hablando sobre la
Great.
infraestructura,
Someone
¿cómo la
asks
conectividad
about
piensa
infrastructure
que
guaranteeing internet
debería
connectivity. What is
esto de
best?
conocer
To
a
have public efforts or private efforts or both? Well, I think it needs to be a collaborative model. I think at the public level, governments need to help with authorizations. So, getting permits, for example, shouldn't be complex, right? If we're going to be using land posts or if we want to make use of the spectrum, we should be able to do it. It is fundamental then for the state to create that enabling environment for the networks. Now, getting funding from the state and from governments is not always necessary because at the core of this, we want the projects to be sustainable. Maybe you might remember our RTLC projects, and I know that governments invested a lot of money, and when the project was done or when the government changed, then those projects were left behind. So we would like for the state support would be more about creating the conditions so that the project is sustainable and not with just providing funds one time, let's snap a picture, look at what I did, and then maybe if the project crumbles 5 years from now, nothing happens, right? So that's that. And then at the private level, I would say that traditional commercial models will continue to exist. So commercial operators, I'm guessing, will have no problem with this, and I hope they continue to grow as they've been growing. But the problem is they're not enough to connect those that don't have a connection. So on the one hand, we have commercial operators who provide internet access. Then we have the state, which needs to create enabling connections. But in the middle, we have the community. And if it's not the community who minds this problem, the commercial operator won't come in because there's no market for them, and the state will not be sufficient with just providing a bit of funding for a couple of time, and that will even for a bit of time, and that would even be worse than not giving them anything, because if I give you internet for a year and then I take it away from you, that'd be terrible too. Yes, another question. How do we control the monopoly of big ISPs? Because they continue to get more data.
Eso
Well,
es una preocupación y es
that's a
algo que la
concern.
investigación
It has to do with consolidation.
estuvo y existe.
I
Lo que
think
pasa es que
there are
el
interesting
problema
papers and there's interesting documentation on this
es
in
una
ISOC if you go under
y
consolidation.
esa preocupación
And I think that that
no,
concern
no tiene que ver
is
con
not
el
really
Estado o la
about
empresa,
who is
es
connected or who has access, but it's more about services and the consolidation at the ISP
hacia
level.
los
We're
portales,
talking about social networks. We're
los
talking
grupos, las
about
estructuras
even
más
infrastructure companies.
importantes
I mean, Amazon, of
gobiernan
course, right now is
la
bigger
decisión.
because of its infrastructure, but not
Entonces,
necessarily because of what
por
they're
ejemplo,
selling.
todo
So,
el ecosistema de Internet
considering that, the entire internet
funciona
ecosystem, I think,
mediante
is learning and adapting right
un
now. If you pay attention
conjunto
in Europe right now,
de medidas y
change is underway and measures
conforme al GDPR,
are
por ejemplo,
being amended. At
vienen,
first, with the way in which information was being handled,
tienen que ver
and every
con
single day we have new decisions that are coming up that connect to
estructuras consolidadas.
these consolidated
No hay
structures.
monopolios porque
I
no
wouldn't
hay,
call this a monopoly though, because nobody actually prevents us from organizing
tenemos servicios
ourselves and
gratuitos.
create another service such as
Todo el tiempo estamos
TikTok or
trabajando
social networks. As a matter of
con
time, as a matter of
protocolos
fact, new
estimulados.
things come up all the time. Like
Cada
Discord, for
lunes
example.
siempre
Every single day, new services come up that might end up becoming the new Facebook, the new Twitter, um,
no sé, Amazon.
the new Amazon. I don't know.
Pero
But
no hay,
I would say that
no hay una propuesta
I would say that there is
concreta que
no
podamos hacer
concrete
para que el
proposal that
impacto
we
de
might
estos servicios
present
consolidados
to make sure that the impact of these
no
consolidated
se afecte
services
puntualmente.
does not
Creo que
affect
estamos
us as
entre todos
users. It is
viendo,
something that we're discussing.
adaptándonos
It is something that we
y
are
puede
adapting
pasar un
to.
tiempo
And I think it's going to
para
take a
que
really long time
eh, podamos estar más tranquilos sobre
for
el
us
conjunto de
to
conocimiento que
feel better about the information that we are providing these websites. Okay, there's another question. Um, Here, there are certain, there's a difficult concept that I didn't understand, and I would like for you to explain it. And then, what could be the goal for signatories of free software? So, accountable. You didn't understand accountability.
¿Cómo es
Fine.
responsable
Accountability has to do
esa
with the way in
persona o
which
institución
that person who is connecting or providing information is responsible for what they're doing and for how we can make sure whether that
que se
person is
comprometieron
doing it
a
in the way
hacerlo?
that they said that they would be doing it.
Cuando,
So,
por ejemplo, nos dan un servicio y nos hacen firmar
when someone is providing a service to us and they tell us that we need to
si no
accept
tengo
certain terms and
otra forma de
conditions,
utilizar
if
ese
there is no other way for us
servicio,
to use
somos
that service rather than accepting that,
un poco cautivos.
then we're kind of being held hostage.
Y bueno, hay una responsabilidad de dar
So
información
there
y
is a
de
responsibility
brindar
that this
información
person who is providing the
y
service
eso tiene que ver
has, and they should answer to what they're doing.
Internet,
And that's what I said
permite
when I was talking at the beginning.
eso permite que un
Luckily, the
jugador
internet is an innovative
y las decisiones
place,
que se
and the
tomaron
decisions
o
that we make or that
que se encontraron como solución 5 o
have
10 años
been
atrás,
made 5 or 10 years ago do not apply anymore.
con eso
Things are changing constantly, and we should always be on the
justamente
lookout for these changes. And we need to create rules
servicios que
for these
tienen
services
usuarios cautivos para que
that are
no
holding these users
trabajen
hostage
de una manera
so
correcta.
that they do things in the correct way and that they're held accountable for their
Esa es la punta
actions.
del... ¿Cuál era la otra parte?
That was one part of the question. What was the other? What could be the goal for free software
El,
signatories?
el software libre
Okay, with regards to free software,
eh,
open software,
es un pilar
I would say that that's a pillar for
del estilo de
us,
Internet.
at least for the internet way of networking or the internet model,
Estándares abiertos.
because it is very much
Conectar
connected
las
to open
aplicaciones
standards
funcionales a
everywhere.
cualquiera puede
Open
hacer
standards make sure that anyone can develop
de la
software
nube
that
al mismo
interacts
tiempo
with that
y,
service.
del lado del software libre nos permite que
And when we
cualquiera
talk about
pueda usar un código
open
sabiendo
source
exactamente lo que hace.
software,
La unión de los
that
dos es la
enables
situación
us to
ideal.
use it knowing
Cualquiera puede
exactly what it
descargar
does.
software
So that would be the ideal situation.
para,
Anyone
para los
can
servicios
develop
y
someone,
que uno pueda descargar
and then
y
anyone
usar
can
esa
download
aplicación
and then run
sabiendo
whichever app
qué es
they
lo
want to
que lo que
download
está corriendo y
and
además
run, knowing what that code
los
is.
building blocks
And we also talk about building blocks.
de ambas
As a matter
presentaciones
of fact,
de
when you see
networking
the internet way of networking
básicamente
presentation, you will see that one of the main components
los
are
bloques
those
reusables, ¿no?
reusable building blocks. And open
¿Cómo
source
los pasos
software provides us
sobre
with this advantage
miles
that we
de
are
bases de datos
building over the
encriptadas
code that
con
was
innovaciones
developed by someone
tecnológicas
else.
y mucho más
And so
sencillas.
innovation
Para
is
nosotros,
much easier and it has a much more meaningful impact. So, a main pillar for us would be the creation of open source
pero
applications.
no es
And of course, it goes
un,
hand in hand with open standards.
no lo podemos tomar como
But
un principio de
I wouldn't
Internet,
say that this is an internet principle or an internet
pero
requirement,
una
though,
buena o segura
because the only thing
los estándares
that
abiertos
ensures we have interoperability are those principles that I
no es
mentioned.
requisito
This is not
para
necessary.
Internet
It is not
que
necessary that the software we use for internet services is an open source software because a company can do business.
respete los
And
estándares
as
abiertos
long as they respect
y,
open
y ofrezca los
standards
servicios
and
a
they
otras
allow
aplicaciones.
for those services to interact with those of other developers, that might be enough. Okay, great. And then the last question would be, according to you, how much do we benefit from using 5G in the short, long,
Bueno,
and medium term in
como comentaba al
education?
comienzo, me parece que hay
Well, as I was saying at the
distintos
beginning, I think that
enfoques
expectation for 5G is too high.
en los temas de
In
educación.
particular, with regards to
Yo lo veo de dos
education,
formas
what I
principales.
think would be the biggest advantage of using 5G would be the cost will be lower for 4G.
Más eficiente.
And 4G is more than enough for
Y por suerte,
education.
todos los operadores van a
So,
estar preocupados
luckily, all
en
operators are going to
implementar
be really
tecnologías
concerned with implementing 5G to charge more for their services, and those 4G
más
equipments and technologies, which are more than sufficient for us to have access
más
to internet for education, will
por
be
radio base
less
de
costly.
servicios
As a
open
matter of fact, we all already have open source
el costo por
services
LTE
in
es
LTE
excelente.
networks that work
Tuviéramos
just fine. And
licencias
if we had more flexible licenses for
podríamos
access
implementarlo
to the
en
spectrum,
cualquier
we
lugar,
could be setting those
en
up
Uruguay,
anywhere in rural
en
schools and universities
proveedores
that are
en
far away
provincias,
from
empresas
providers who are interested in providing
Así
services.
que
Students could actually set up their networks in those places. So I really don't
eh,
see
grandes oportunidades.
that there will be great opportunity in using 5G for education.
Y más que eso,
Oh, I'm sorry, Christian.
aclarar una
Yes,
cosa. No es
yes.
que
And another
5G
thing that I want to explain, it's not that 5G is
fantástica,
poor
sino que
technology. It is
es
actually
sorprendente
fantastic. I think
el uso que hace
it's
de
amazing the
lo
way it
eficiente que es
uses the
el
spectrum and how
spectrum,
efficient it is in using it.
pero
But
no tenemos que
what
pensar
I would say is that we don't have to think of this 5G
definitivamente
technology as a very
como una
disruptive
tecnología más.
technology. It is just another access technology to our disposal. Okay, well, those were all the questions then. Just remember, if you're a member and you're interested in getting a participation certificate, make sure that you remember that the requirements are one, that you access the Zoom meeting through the link, two, that you answer the trivia, and three, that you get more than 2 points. So I will be sharing the link with you through the chat. The next session that we will be having today has to do with the critical properties of the internet, and I really recommend you join us because we will have a case study in this session so that you can apply those critical properties of the internet to a fictitious case and see how well you can use those critical properties. The next session starts in less than an hour. And some people are asking whether or not I can tell you how many points you're getting. No, I will tell you in the end because there are so many members participating in the trivia, and I can't get pull the information so quickly. So when we are done this week, I will be sharing with you how many points you got. Now, as to the presentation, remember that you have the recording. I will be sharing the links with you in the WhatsApp group, and we have also session recordings as well. I will try to see if I can create a zip code to consolidate all the presentations that you can have them. So thank you again for joining us in the session, and see you in 45 minutes in the critical properties session that will, like I said, be very interesting because we will put your thoughts to the test and we will try to see how we apply those critical properties to a fictitious case. So see you soon. And thank you, Christian, for your presentation and all of you for joining us. Thanks, everyone.